Elizabeth Tudor is the firstborn of Henry VIII and Ann Boleyn. Henry has split with the Catholic Church, divorced his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, and married Ann Boleyn, all so he can produce a male heir.
So when Elizabeth was born, it was a case of, oh dear. She was, of course, expected to be a boy, but she wasn't quite what was expected. And so there was a sense of a sort of bittersweet celebration at her birth.
To make matters worse, Elizabeth's mother, Ann Boleyn, goes on to have several miscarriages. And eventually, Henry VIII tires of his second wife, too. Anne is accused of adultery and executed. Elizabeth has lost her mother at a painfully young age.
She wasn't told of the full brutality of the facts, but she was a very precocious young girl, and she noticed that something had changed immediately.
That lady who used to visit her visits her no longer. Something had changed in the atmosphere around her.
Elizabeth is punished for her mother's disgrace. She's stripped of the title Princess and demoted to Lady and sent to live in isolation with a governess. In the following years, Henry VIII remarries and finally has a son and heir, Edward. But a series of letters show Elizabeth continues to be ignored by her father.
What this and the other letters show is the hardship, actually, that Elizabeth suffered during her childhood. So Lady Bryan here, so she's looking after the motherless Elizabeth, and she's pleading with him to supply her with clothes. And so Lady Bryan says here that she has neither kirtle nor petticoat nor linen or kerchiefs. And so the list goes on. It's clear that poor old Elizabeth has been completely forgotten about. She's just cast adrift. Couldn't be further from the throne if she tried.
When the neglected Elizabeth Tudor is 13 years old, her father, King Henry VIII, dies, and her half-brother, Edward, becomes king. But the sickly boy passes away just a few years later. And in his place, Elizabeth's Catholic half-sister Mary becomes queen. She sees Elizabeth as a rival and throws her into the Tower of London.
Elizabeth I had an incredibly traumatic childhood. First, her mother is executed, then her sister, Mary, puts her in the Tower and nearly chops off her head. Really as traumatic as you could imagine.
Her life is under threat. She's constantly having to gauge the mood of the people in power in order to increase her chances of survival.
But while she is held prisoner, Mary's health goes downhill, and powerful Protestant factions push for Elizabeth to be named her successor.
Mary refused to acknowledge Elizabeth as the princess, but Elizabeth is very much a symbol of Protestant hope in Mary's Catholic England.
Mary dies not long afterwards. And in a remarkable turnaround of fortunes, in 1559, Elizabeth is rushed to Westminster Abbey and crowned Queen of England.
Here is Elizabeth, 25 years old, who has suddenly realized that rather than being a prisoner and in danger of life, she's now the queen.
And so finally, Elizabeth had her day. She was queen, but nobody could ever have predicted that would happen.
Elizabeth and the Tudor state start creating a space for England in terms of other countries. And then it has huge repercussions, it has huge implications on the later history of English interaction with the wider world.
When Elizabeth I comes to the throne in 1559, her kingdom is an isolated island, rejected by the Catholic nations in Europe. England is not a global power.
They are on the margins at this point. And Elizabeth, around the middle of her reign, she really begins to understand that England needs to do something about this.
Elizabeth wants to expand her nation's horizons, acquire new riches, and spread her influence across the globe. So she welcomes a band of intrepid new explorers into her court, wily mariners like Walter Raleigh and Francis Drake. And with her blessing, they explore and settle lands all over the New World, in the Caribbean and North America.
Overseas expansion under the auspices of Sir Walter Raleigh and Sir Francis Drake and the like brings Elizabeth great wealth. They're bringing ships laden with gold, they're bringing exotic spices and all these expensive foodstuffs.
And of course, they also flirt with her, and her male commanders circumnavigate the globe and plant the flag of England in her name.
But it also brings trouble. There is piracy amongst Elizabeth's navy, seizing gold bullion from Spanish ships. It causes diplomatic incidents. It excites the hostility of some of the most powerful leaders in the world.
But Elizabeth I proves a master at smoothing things over. Using the diplomatic skills she's honed as a young woman in the tempestuous Tudor court, she charms the irate Spanish ambassadors and even adopts their national dress.
Here we have a particularly striking portrait of Elizabeth I. What I think is really interesting about this is the silhouette of the monarch here, quite extraordinary. This huge, wide farthingale skirt is a Spanish style. And by incorporating this extraordinary silhouette from Spain, Elizabeth is making a really strident, clear statement about the importance of internationalism, the cosmopolitan nature of her court.
She pulls out all the stops when it comes to visits from foreign ambassadors. She always makes sure to show every courtesy so that they will write home about the English Queen's generosity, about her refinement and the culture of her court. So she makes sure they have a good time.
But the swashbuckling days of Elizabeth's court mask a very difficult legacy overseas. In England's new empire, the indigenous people are oppressed, displaced, and even traded.
So this is a letter from John Hawkins, one of Elizabeth's great adventurers, and he's sort of boasting of his exploits, really. This is all the beginnings of Elizabeth's empire, and he talks really about slavery because he refers to some Negroes in Guinea and has been able to sell them in the West Indies in return for gold, pearls, and emeralds. This is the darker side of Elizabeth's empire, and it's something that will have ramifications 400 years later that her namesake, Elizabeth II, is going to have to deal with.